Welcome to the EPRS Chronicles for our two-part series on migration. Migration has been making headlines for years now, whether it's migrant ships arriving to European shores, asylum seekers living in overcrowded camps or even on the streets, or countries arguing over responsibility and fairness when providing international protection. For this episode, we will delve deeper into the implications of irregular migration for the EU. I'm joined by Kostika Dubrava, EPRS policy analyst. Hello.
Hello.
Let's start with definitions, because migration can mean several different things and several different movements. Can you help us by defining them?
Indeed, migration terms may be confusing. Irregular or illegal migrants are those people who enter a country without authorization, for example, without obtaining a visa. These terms have different meanings in different contexts, but in the EU, the preferred term now is irregular migrants, because we want not to associate irregular migration with criminality. Mm-hmm. Legal or regular migration, on the other hand, refers to people who enter a country according to immigration rules. Another important term is asylum seekers, and this refers to people who ask for international protection in the EU in line with the Geneva Convention on the Protection of Refugees. If their application is successful, then they will become refugees. What's important to note here is that anybody has the right to ask for international protection, no matter how they arrived in a country. For example, if they are irregular migrants, they can still apply for international protection.
Thank you for clarifying the terms. Since this episode is focusing on irregular migration, can you tell us how many irregular migrants reach the EU annually?
Irregular migration was a big issue back in 2015 when we had about 1 million irregular migrants arriving in the EU. The numbers fell afterwards, but started to rise again in the last 2 years. In 2022, we had more than 300,000 people arriving caught at external borders. The rising numbers have to do with the end of the pandemic and the end of the border restrictions associated with that, but also with the worsening economic and political situation in different parts of the world. Think of the continuing war in Syria, the Taliban takeover of government in Afghanistan, or the dire economic situation in sub-Saharan Africa.
We have also seen that many irregular migrants are prepared to take huge risks to reach Europe. For instance, many people who try to reach Europe by boat never actually make it.
Unfortunately, attempts to enter the EU irregularly often have tragic consequences for migrants. Mm-hmm. One of the most dangerous routes, migration route towards the EU, is the Mediterranean Sea. If we look at the figures, according to the International Organization for Migration, in 2022 alone, 2,700 people have died or have gone missing in the Mediterranean Sea. Well, this means that about 7 people have drowned every day trying to reach Europe by sea.
7 people per day is an incredible figure. It does make me wonder why people would go through such lengths to try and reach the EU.
There are several reasons for this. First of all, more and more people are trying to reach Europe. Secondly, as people continue to have limited legal channels to enter the EU, for example, they don't have access to an EU visa, they try to find alternative ways. And thirdly, increased enforcement and border control by the EU and third countries push people to take on more dangerous routes and also to resort to smugglers to enter the EU.
There's also a lot of discussion lately about the building of walls and border fences. Can you tell us a little more about what is happening at Europe's external borders?
Actually, building border fences is not an European phenomenon. Mm-hmm. It's part of a broader trend. In line with this trend, several member states have started to build border barriers, fences of different types, in order to prevent irregular migration. Mm-hmm. We calculated that in the last decade, the aggregate length of border fences at the EU borders grew from about 300 to more than 2,000 kilometers. That makes about 10% of external borders.
Do these fences actually help prevent irregular migration?
There is mixed evidence about the effectiveness of these border barriers. Generally, this depends on a couple of factors, such as the length of the border, the type of the border barrier, and also the level of enforcement. What is pretty clear is that these border barriers are pretty costly to build, and they require a lot of investment to maintain. Another issue is that border barriers may have unintended consequences. For example, people will try to find different ways around these border fences, which may amplify the level of suffering, human loss, and also make the smuggler's job more profitable, as I mentioned before.
And are these barriers actually legal?
To be clear, border barriers are not explicitly forbidden by EU law. In fact, member states have an obligation to defend the common borders, and they do so by putting up specific infrastructure and also using surveillance technologies such as cameras and radars, sensors. However, the construction of border barriers raises an issue about the protection of fundamental rights, because border fences may actually impede the right of people in need to ask international protection in the EU.
So it's not actually illegal, but it is complex to implement properly. At the end of the day, who is paying for these fences?
This is a highly debated issue. Several member states have repeatedly asked for EU money to build border barriers to protect the common borders. So far, the European Commission has refused to allow for this, and it has insisted that EU funding is available for different other types of border control means, such as infrastructures and technologies. But the debate is still ongoing. In the meantime, one development has been that several member states have agreed to cooperate and to jointly fund border barriers outside the EU framework.
Thank you, Kostika.
Thank you.
Regardless of the difficulties in entering the European Union, many irregular migrants make it past the border. Our next episode will therefore focus on asylum seeking once in the EU. For more content on the EU's most important topics, subscribe to the EPRS channel.